We are live and attendees should be filling in. There we go. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We'll let people continue logging in. We'll get started in the next 30 seconds. If you're on and you want to open up your chat, we do have a handout for today's presentation. And also if you want to open up your Q&A, that's how you'll answer questions to Phil. And we can get back to you that way too. So I'm Amanda Link. I'm the communication specialist at the Cornell Local Roads Program. Here today with Phil Spezio going over shop safety and PPE. Before we get into Phil's presentation, we have our typical questions. So we're going to start with I work for. So you'll see a poll pop up. If you cannot access the poll, you can always throw it in the Q&A. So I work for the town, county, city or village, state or federal, tribal, private, or the weekend. So far, no one works for the weekend. That's the one I always get.
They're just coming off it, Amanda.
Right. So it looks like the bulk is from the county, some private town, state, and tribal. Next question we have is my job is administration, highway superintendent, engineer, field crew, board member, or none of the above. If your answer is none of the above, could you throw it in the Q&A? Cool. It looks like a little bit of mix. We have administration, highway, engineering, field crew, and some none of the above.
Mm-hmm.
Highway project inspector as well. Next, how many years in your current position? Less than 1 month, less than a year, 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5 years, 5 to 10 years, or 11 to 20 years. Like we have a good mix, so some less than a year, some 11 to 20 years. And then the last question, I'm going to have you throw in the Q&A. Where are you? So what town do you work for, or what state are you in? If you write New York State, I'll figure that one out. So we have Orange County, Lewis County, Wayne County, Washington County Safety Office, on a Smithtown, job Long Island representing. Grew up in Patchogue. We have Warren County, Niagara, New York City, Region 11, more Wayne County. Got a good mix. And with that, I will turn it over to Phil. I'll be popping in and out with some polls. So if you have any questions, throw them in the Q&A and make sure to open that chat because I'm going to throw a handout in there in the next few minutes.
Awesome. Thanks, Amanda. Good morning, everybody. Here to get started on some shop safety and some PPE. So there's many different directions that we could go with this. So I've broke it down a little bit with some overview of shop safety, and then we get into PPE. So separated it out a little bit. But Phil Spezio here, Washington County, been with Washington County going into 16 years or in the 16th year now, and worked in the private sector prior to that. And then I've been in the fire service since 1981. Yeah, long time ago. Also, SF, throw a little plug out for us, Empire State Safety Association. It's a group safety association helping different organizations with safety. So if you haven't heard of us, Google ESSA, or feel free if there's somebody on that may know the website. throw that in chat if you'd like, but something organization that's helpful, just like Cornell is involving improving safety and health and culture and things like that. So anyway, let's get started a little bit with the shop safety and some overview going into shop safety. So I always like to go over hazard control and how if we identify a hazard, how actually is the best way to control the hazard. So starting off a little bit, elimination and substitution, right? Either or, either we don't have to do the job for some reason, right? Or we substitute in, for an example, a lesser hazardous chemical for something that's pretty hazardous or flammable or that sort of thing. Engineering controls is next, right? That's our next level of control. Engineering controls, we kind of separate the hazards from us as a general rule. And then we drop down into the last three with PPE being the last measure, right? Safe work practice, procedures, policies, some sort of training, and also at the end of the PPE. So a quick question here is, why would I separate, and you can throw these answers into the Q&A, I believe. Why do I separate out the top two control measures from the bottom three? We got the top two control measures. And then I've got some backslashes, and then the bottom three. Does anybody know why I separate out those top two control measures from the bottom three? So we're separating out the human element, if you would, right? So the top two control measures, right? We're separating out, we're keeping the hazard away from us, right? But the bottom three, we still have the hazard to a certain degree, and now it relies on us to keep us safe. So it's always better to work on those top two or work in the areas of the top two before we drop down those bottom three ones. It's not the bottom three ones aren't good control measures, they are. They just rely on the human element a little bit. So, all right. So now we got that a little bit cleared up. Culture, right? Culture. If you've heard me talk before, I tend to talk about a lot about the work culture and the environment and what's important, what's most important when it comes to culture. Because oftentimes in the safety world, right, we're not communicating, we're not talking about or developing something that people aren't already aware of. They have a good amount of background of what we're usually talking about. But it's the culture. It's the, hey, let's do it this way instead of this other way that might be what we think is quicker. So in doing that in a culture, something I think the longer that I'm doing this work, this type of work, the more important I think this is. So the building of great systems, building a great systems is something that's really important. What's the system? What's the process? What's the procedure? And then developing good people to follow that system. So if you really look and boil everything down, it comes up with build great systems, whatever that system is, that process, that procedure, that control, and then develop good people to follow that system. You know, it helps in many different ways. It helps in the training portion of it. It helps in if something happens and our prevention measures fail, it helps in the investigation side of things. It's like, all right, what did we miss when we built the system? What didn't we do from a training standpoint when we were developing good people? Or did we just take a shortcut? Did we miss something somewhere? You know, or is some outside influence affected what it is that we did at that point in time, right? Because those outside influences are real and they're out there. So if you take that, you build great systems, you develop good people. It all boils down to this and this. You add in a bit of trust, some leadership, some communication, along with those great systems and those good people following those systems, you really start to build that team, that culture, that if you would, that positive team foundation. And that comes into play when you set things up and things start to happen, and we have to get this done, and we have to get it done, you know, say yesterday, right? So time is of the essence. It means that we get that done, but we still work within the culture that we've developed and nurtured. Why? Because we all understand what the value of the work culture is. And, you know, it's a work culture of, we're not going to get anybody hurt. We're going to do it right the first time. And we're going to be productive, which means efficiency is going to be there, right? So that positive team foundation is a blend of great systems, good people, and then a foundation of trust, leadership, and communication, right? Because it takes a bit to build somebody's trust, but it takes a very, very short time to lose trust. One of the things that I enjoy doing, the career that I've chosen, and the people I've met and worked with and things like that, is that, you know, we have the opportunity in safety and health to work with a lot of different people doing a lot of different things. And with that, you know, you start to develop ways in which you can see into the culture of a work team or an organization, in which the organizations that have a foundation of trust, some good sound leadership, and some effective communication, you can tell right away within 10-15 minutes, you know, there's a foundation of trust here. In those work groups that the trust isn't as high, you can see that pretty quickly too. Usually 15 to 20 minutes in, you can get a sense for what the culture is like. The teams, the organizations that have this positive culture, this positive team foundation, you know, it's funny, people don't get hurt. They do it right the first time, and they have a bit of fun. They're efficient, they're effective, and they have a bit of fun while at work. So, all right. So let's talk about shop and safety and quality and productivity, right? So safety isn't a compromise if done and worked into as a plan, right? To engineer safety in to our shops and to our organizations and to our teams. It's a blend, it's a synergy, if you would, of safety, quality, and productivity all together. And like, if we put this all together, we can't help but to be efficient, right? I think there's nobody out there now doing less with more people, right? But we're all trying to do more with less people, oftentimes with less resources and things like that. So it even becomes more important to build and make sure that we have a synergy, a blend, if you would, of safety, quality, and productivity together. And then you'll have an efficient work environment, because we're all trying to do a bit more, I think, these days, with less people, less resources, things like that. All right, so let's jump in. Building ground shop safety is the first part of the two-part program today. And we'll talk about building and grounds shops and things of that nature, clean and organized. So is your buildings clean, organized, and well planned out? What's your feelings on this? And I think we have a poll question out there that you can answer. See what we have for responses. Is your building clean, organized, and well planned out? And this is building, grounds, shops.
It looks like we have 4 say yes, 1 say no, and 8 say needs some work.
Yep. Okay. It's about what we were talking about before we jumped live in the end, I think. Okay, good. That's helpful. So super. So I think most of us fall into that, you know, it needs some work type thing. And so what you wrestle with here is it good enough? Or, hey, let's take some time and take a look at this, right? Because we kind of are a bit, we're creatures of habit to a certain extent. So we just continue to do what it is that's worked or somewhat worked or seems to have worked in the past. But if you look at it and it needs some work, it's like, hey, let's take some time and let's develop this new plan. Let's plan or engineer out our workplace so that we can improve it, type thing. So, all right, about where I was thinking. So, all right, good. So building inspection. So this first thing that kind of comes to mind, right? is building inspections and how frequently, right? How often should we inspect our work areas? So and this is the shops, this is the building itself, this is the outside grounds. How often should we be looking at our work areas? And there's another question up.
We're waiting for a few more people.
Yep. But yeah, this is kind of open-ended. So
Looks like we have 10 for daily, 3
Okay.
for weekly, 1 for monthly.
monthly, okay, all right, good. And the type of inspection, I think pretty much you're all right, is depends on how much you're doing, where you're working, right? But daily inspections of certainly of rigging equipment, if you, we'll talk about that a little later, but they need to be inspected right before each use, right? And then, your building area, your immediate shop area and things like that, probably a daily inspection. And then your weekly inspections might be your building and one of the examples that I have up on the slide here is a building inspection form. And then monthly, maybe a little bit more thorough. And then annually, things like fire extinguishers come to mind, where you have an outside agency come in and inspect them annually. So here's the thing with building inspections. I've seen a lot of them out there. Try to keep it simple, but yet cover the information you need. And what you don't want here is, if you're doing, let's just say example, a monthly building inspection or, a weekly building inspection, you don't want someone having to circle a problem. In this situation, it's either a yes or a no. It's pretty simple. You don't want to be circling no's, every week for a month or 2 months or 3 months or that sort of thing. So if there is something that isn't meeting their criteria for a good inspection, quality inspection, we need to have some sort of system, right, to take care of that sort of thing. So that's a little bit about inspections. So that's good. Sounds like people are doing them and at the frequencies that are pretty good. So let's talk about the building a little bit. There's a wide range of buildings. When you look at the DPW structures around the state, certainly a wide range of age and type of building structures are there. You can see one in the bottom in the middle, right? It's a pretty old building, right? And that's where a lot of them were like that quite a few years ago. And then you got the medium age building, that are more like what's in the top corner on the left. And then a brand new building is in the right above the building. So you can kind of see the wide range of buildings that we have. Talking about the building itself, the construction type, the roof, the walls, the floor, the exterior of the structure, right? What type of the structure it is, right? And then the infrastructure, electrical, pneumatic, plumbing, things of that nature. How are we heating it, all right? That sort of thing. So are there hazards inherent with our buildings? Another poll question here is, are there hazards inherent with our buildings? Be a little bit of a hazard here, kind of, right? And it would get caught in our building inspection. Kind of see some things in front of some disconnects, some electrical breakers and disconnects.
We have 11 for yes, 2 for no.
Okay, good. Yeah, I think we will take a look at some of those hazards that can be inherent in our buildings shortly. So, okay, good. All right, the building itself, right? Exits, means of egress, space, eating / break area, office, and bathroom is one of them. So what do we struggle with the most in making our DPW buildings, shops as safe as possible? So if we have this as another poll question, which I'm not sure, but if you can answer it either in Q&A and chat or chat, is what do we struggle with the most in making our DPW building, shops as safe as possible? One of the things that come to my mind when I'm thinking about our buildings that we have in Washington County, the public works in particular, is space, right? I think space is something most of us would say here is when we struggle with making our DPW buildings and shops as safe as possible. One of the things that jump out right away is the space, especially when you start talking about the plows, the wing assemblies and things like that on the truck, and taking up the amount of space. Our older buildings, many of them that weren't engineered for the size of the building or size of the vehicle that we have these days, right? And the eating break area, right, that should be separate from where we store the trucks and do our work, right? An office space where you can actually do some organization, some thinking for this. Oftentimes they might be right in the shop themselves as well. Exits and means of egress. You can see the picture there, the thresholds painted orange. Probably not the best means of egress, right? Going in and out of that building. For the people that work in that building, they're probably ready for it and are somewhat used to it, right? But the people that are not going to that building, they're not expecting that threshold to be in that exit or that means of egress there, right? Bathrooms and things like that. So I think we struggle with with many of the buildings that we still use these days for DPW facilities. Space would be something, I think, that if most people could build a new building, that's what they're considering is, all right, what additional space do we need? Yeah. A little bit about the shop, right? Clean, organized, and well planned out. We talked about that a couple minutes ago. With adequate space is a key to shop safety. You can see where something's clean and organized, you're more apt, and it's easier to keep it that way. When it gets out of control and, you know, maybe you're working at some job sites, it's summer, it's project season or whatever, and you get back to the shop and you just empty the trucks and kind of put them in there. But if the shop is clean, organized, and well planned out, it's much easier to keep it that way. If it's not, then it starts to get more and more difficult the longer it is of keeping the shop clean and organized. But clean and organized work areas, well planned out work areas, the likelihood of becoming injured or having an incident that our control measures didn't work for us is more likely than one that we do have clean and organized and things like that.
In the Q&A, we have lack of ownership as a reason for
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep. That's for sure. And, you know, man, that's a good point, that the lack of ownership, that would probably be a symptom of, you know, maybe that trust, leadership, communication foundation. You know, maybe we have 2 of the 3, maybe we have 2.5 of the 3, or that sort of thing. But the ownership, when you build a system and then develop good people, and then you have that foundation, you may not see that lack of ownership quite as much as you would otherwise. So, but yeah, good point, right? We have to care, right? We have to care about what it is we're doing, kind of see the why of it. Why is it important to keep things clean and organized, well planned out, and your tools in good condition, right? So that they're safe to be utilized as well. So, all right, so a little bit about the building. And then our grounds, right? Some grounds. So took some pictures here of some areas around Washington County, but this is some stuff that we have, right? We have some sort of stockpiles, salt bins, salt storage areas, areas in which we're backing the trucks under to put either sand or salt, or what we're doing lots of times in the winter time for snow and ice control, things like that. Many of the shops, many of the building grounds facilities have some sort of above ground fuel storage tanks, right, with secondary containment and things like that. And then you have, you know, areas around the building that we use for different types of storage and things. So again, think about how you want to set it up, how you want angles set up between your loader and your dump truck in effective ways. And do you want to be loading that in front of the truck bays where, you know, other trucks are coming in and out of, things of that nature, right? Access to above ground storage tanks and storage, and you know, if you have open, like the picture on the bottom left shows secondary containment, and it's not covered with a roof. So you're thinking about rain, especially the weather we've been having lately. We have lots of rain, so you have to have a way to safely and effectively drain those tanks so that you have rooms should something happen, right? So you have to have a way of doing that where you're draining the water, but yet when you drain the water, you close the plug back up and padlock it or whatever you're doing so that you don't leave it open and then, God forbid, have some sort of an incident where one of the tanks fail and now you're using that secondary containment, though it's not going to be effective because you left the drain open overnight, that sort of thing. So lots of different things. We don't have time for an hour class today to get into it, but certainly well planned out, organized, clean as far as safe walkways and traffic control and things of that nature have to be in place for the grounds around our DPW facilities for sure. Think about your traffic in, your traffic out, and your people traffic around the facility, right? When we're backing vehicles in and out of the truck bays, right? Watch out for that blind spot, people walking and working across the thresholds of the doors. I know that's something that makes me nervous is, the people in the trucks in the backing of equipment, especially out of the doorways. Somebody's walking across that threshold and may be distracted or not paying quite as much attention. We have to be really careful of the backing operations when it comes to the shop safety. For sure, one of the inherent dangers of DPW facilities is the equipment and the equipment moving. It's heavy, right? It's big, with people working around the shop and working in and outside of the shop area. So you start talking about shop safety and what could go wrong, what type of injuries or illnesses do we have stemming from our DPW shops across the state. What's typically our number one reason for injuries in our workplaces? I got a bunch of different types up there. But what's our number? Any thoughts on what our number one injury is, or what more likely it is statewide? I know what it is in our county and also area counties around us, but does anybody have any ideas of what, if we were to have an injury in one of our workplaces, what typically do you think it would be?
We have slips and trips, slips,
Yep.
trips and falls,
Yep.
back injury.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Amanda. So yeah, the first couple, right? I think a lot of us would probably point to that slip, trips, and falls as our number one reason for injury, followed closely behind with something such as body mechanics, right? Pulled muscles, shoulders, backs, things of that nature, right? Because we move stuff, right? We move material, whether we're moving material with equipment or whether we're moving material with our body, right? One movement at a time, safe lifting practices, good body mechanics, right? I refer to the athletic position quite often when we're getting ready to do anything, right? Regardless of the weight of it. So looking at some of the hazards, right? What typically is, stems causing an injury, right? And we got the slip, trips, and falls. We certainly have a fire hazard, right? Electrical, right? Oftentimes where our DPW shops, there's water and there's electricity, and we know that they don't mix so well. We have enough chemicals that we can be dangerous, right? Along those chemical lines, right? You want to make sure that you have an SDS for each chemical that you have. And an effective system seems to be where, you don't order a chemical until you ensure that you have an SDS that's the most current on file and someone's reviewed that for the hazards associated with that chemical. So, try not to take that sample from that vendor coming in without being sure you understand what the hazards of the chemical is first. And a good way to do that is you don't purchase or accept chemicals without the most current SDS, right? And then if you do put a chemical into a secondary container, that secondary container must be labeled, and there's all, requirements on the label, but be sure it's suitable. It's not a food or beverage container. And that it's labeled properly so you can get back to the SDS for that chemical. Rigging and lifting equipment, this is something that we have, and it's a ranges the variety of the types range across the state. But one of the things that's most important is never ever get under a lifted load, and always inspect your rigging and lifting equipment before every use. Personal protection, we'll talk a little bit about that later. Vehicle and equipment, right? There's certainly some hazards associated with that, especially with backing. If you do not have to back up a piece of equipment or a vehicle, that's the best option. Try to avoid backing whenever possible. If you do have to back, follow goal, get out and look, or have somebody guiding you, that sort of thing. So, but backing is one of the more dangerous things we do. Tools in good condition, safely stored and ready for use, the right tool for the job, right? If we're modifying a tool, it may not be the right tool for the job. Space, I think a lot of our DPW facilities really struggle with the space. And then obviously structurally sound. So, all right, so that's a good overview. I think hopefully I didn't miss too much there. There's a lot to it. So let's talk a little bit about the slip, trips, and falls and things of that nature and prevention. Here I got a picture. This happens to be a brand new garage. You can tell going up into an area that's a storage area right above the shop floor. Many times we have mezzanines or areas in which we store things. So this is set up quite well. They're not always set up this way, but level clear, right? And clean working walking surfaces, right? Resist the temptation for putting something on the stairs or on a walkway or on a scaffold or things like that. Guardrails in good conditions, right? 42 inches top rail, 21 mid rail, and then oftentimes a 4-inch toe board required. Ladders and steps in good repair, right? Always inspect the ladder before each use, make sure everything is in good working order. Fall protection, right? And adequate lighting in all areas. Proper access is available for all controls and tools that includes like fire extinguisher, things of that nature, electrical disconnects, things like that. So a little bit about slip, trips, and falls prevention. Fire protection, right? Fire extinguishers inspected, charged, and accessible, right? You don't want to be blocking your fire extinguishers. A good way to do that, and maybe it's a red painted square on the floor, is try not to block the fire extinguishers. But again, space comes into that a little bit. Flammable and combustible material should be stored properly, right? Many different ways of storing it, but make sure that they are stored properly. Means of egress, right, is important and to get out, especially wintertime when all the plows are on the truck and the wings and things like that. It can be pretty tight. So be sure you have a way out. Clean, organized, free of trash and waste buildup, right? Something that happens from time to time, but hot work performed in a safe manner, right? You don't want to be using a chemical near some hot work that's, flammable, right? Fire alarm system often comes up with our insurance companies, and the master switch is in the off position. I know that there's been some fires around the state that may have been contributed to not having a coherency or the master switch in the off position overnight. Electrical safety, right? This is one of the ones I think we struggle with, or often a lot of us struggle with, is not having enough outlets for the electricity needs, right? We can't use temporary wiring as permanent, right? No extension cords through walls, doorways, windows, holes, things of that nature. Panels and disconnects are labeled and accessible. Lead cords are of the right size and in good condition. All panels, junction box, control measures, and receptacles should be covered in good repair. So no holes and things like that in electrical junction boxes, no exposed wiring, broken parts, things like that. And then the common one that we see once in a while, and I can't believe it, but multi-strips plugged into other multi-strips. It's almost as bad as the 5-gallon bucket to step on to reach the tool over the workbench. So a little bit on chemical safety, right? SDS on file and available for all chemicals, right? And available is key. Anybody on your work team needs to have accessibility to your SDSs at all times whenever they're working. Chemicals protected and stored properly. Employees understand the hazards, and all secondary containers suitable and labeled properly, right? And make sure that container is not a food or beverage container. So rigging and lifting equipment, right? Slings, wire ropes are hung and tagged in good repair. That's a good way to store them. You don't want to be dragging chains on the ground or across the shop floor, things like that, right? Lifting hardware in good condition, tagged and stored properly, any equipment secured properly. One of the things that's a little bit of a pet peeve of mine is just leaning stuff up against the building, right? Want to be careful about that, especially when it comes to lifting equipment, things like that. Lifts and cranes inspected and in good working order. All jacks and jack stands are labeled and in good repair. So that's a little bit about that. And then personal protection, right? We'll get into this a little bit more, but emergency eye wash stations, if you have them, make sure they're accessible and functioning. Not a bad idea to either have a self-contained unit or a mixing valve to mix in some warmer water, because you got water coming out of the well or many of the water systems. You'll never keep 15 minutes. You never be able to do it because the water just gets so cold. So think a little bit about that. All guards on tools and equipment should be suitable and in place. Tools and equipment, good repair, good body mechanics. Any of the work that you're doing, be sure you're following good body mechanics. Some sort of hazardous energy control procedures, right? Build that system to develop, train the people to do that system. Lockout, tagout is very important when it comes to our vehicles and things like that. First aid supplies, I find it's easy for people to get the first aid equipment and get them up and hung them on the wall and things like that. It's much harder to keep it so that it's updated and things are changed out and stock is checked frequently to be sure you have what you need when you need it and they're not out of date. The personal protective equipment worn and used properly. So in all PPE in good condition. So quick question here when we're talking about protection, and we're going to start going into PPE a little bit here, is does anybody remember what the last measure of control for hazards is? When we think about hazard control, right, there's that hierarchy hazard control that we reviewed a little bit in the beginning. What is the last measure? Anybody? I think you can throw it in the Q&A or the chat. What should we be thinking about from a control measure? What's the last thing we should be thinking about?
We have PPE.
Okay, good. All right. Good. That's it, right? The last measure. It's not that it's not important, but it's the last level, right, of protection. We should put in everything else in place and then finally get into the PPE. So with that, we'll switch gears a little bit and start getting into the PPE or the hazard assessment piece of this, right? So personal protective equipment. How many people have performed a PPE hazard assessment? It doesn't have to be a whole hazardous energy control type or assessment or hazard control assessment, but just from a PPE standpoint, how many of us have performed a PPE hazard assessment?
Every time I get out of the truck and decide if I'm going to wear a vest or not.
Okay, all right.
In the Q&A. And
okay.
Then poll wise, we have 3 for yes and 8 for no.
Okay, all right, good. Okay, so we'll go through the steps, overview steps anyway of a PPE hazard assessment. And if anybody needs further information, certainly can reach out to anybody with Cornell, Amanda, that sort of thing, and then we can get some answers back. So when is it necessary? What kind is necessary? How to properly put it on, adjust, wear, and take it off. Right, don and doff is other words used there. If you ever hear that, the limitations of the equipment, right? Proper use, care, maintenance, useful life. Right, a useful life, especially when it comes to respirators or dust masks or maybe even gloves to a certain extent, right? And then the disposal or the proper disposal of that equipment. All right, so good. So we've got quite a few on that may not have ever done a full PPE hazard assessment. So here's what it boils down to, a little bit of an overview. task, right? What are you going to do? What's the project? What are the specific tasks involved in the project? What are the hazards associated with each task? And then what are our control measures? So this is the hazard assessment piece, all right? So the control measures, we follow the hierarchy here a little bit, right? Engineering controls, right? If we have to do it, so we can't eliminate it, we can't substitute it. Engineering controls, right? That separates the hazard from us. That's the best way. An example of an engineering control would be a guard on a PTO shaft, right? It separates unless it's not properly guarded. If it's properly guarded, it can't hurt us, right? We can't get in. And the best way to look at it guarding, which is a common engineering, is look at it and say, if I want to hurt myself, can I? And if the answer is yes, it's not properly guarded, it needs more guarding. So a little bit on that. So what do we do? What are the hazards associated with what we do? And then what are the control measures that we will utilize? That's the hazard assessment piece, if you can think of those three things, right? All right, what are the type of hazards that we find in the DPW, the public works industry, right? Struck by and caught between certainly come to mind with equipment and machinery. Falls, right? We talked about that earlier. Flying debris, noise, cuts, lacerations of some sort, vibration, dust, temperature, light, chemical, weight, and fire. Hopefully I didn't miss any, but if I did, feel free to throw it out there. But that's kind of the background in which most of our injuries fall into, right? We have real concerns of each one of those type of hazards, right? When I talk about light, it's, torching and welding and things of that nature too. So, all right, now PPE, right? The picture here, this is Francis Wilbur. Some of you may have seen him at the highway school, and we've done at least one, if not a couple of these trainings, virtual trainings as well. So Francis, we're very lucky to have him here. And I think he was born with a chainsaw in his hands. So PPE protection, right? Head, eye, respiratory, right, of some sort, ear, face, hand, body, and foot. These are the areas in which the body we're typically utilizing some sort of personal protective equipment or PPE for. So types of PPE, right? So we got hard helmet, safety glasses, goggles, face shields, right? Many different types of face shields depending on the hazard that we have. Hearing protection of some sort, dust mask, respirators, high visibility clothing, cut resistance, temperature protective or liquid protective clothing, protective footwear, gloves, and then electrical protection on its own, but also electrical protection built into things such as hard helmets and safety shoes and things of that nature, right? We may have to build that into it. So there's many different varieties within each type, but these are the main types of PPE here. So OSHA regulation. So many of you may be familiar with the OSHA regulation. So there's a couple of parts that affect us. Our field work, our project work, things of that nature fall under construction, which is 1926. PPE is covered mostly in subpart E, and I give the regulations up there of 1926.95 through 0.107. So that's where you'll find the PPE requirements from a regulation standpoint for our field work. In our shops, they fall under 1910, and that's .132 through .140. You'll find all the PPE regulations. So that's a little bit of help when you're talking about a PPE hazard assessment and you're going through the hazards and the control measures. I always refer to the regulations as the bare minimum, but they are a resource that you might want to take a look at when you're doing your PPE hazard assessments. And it's listed right in the OSHA regulations. So you can see them there. A little bit of help with the regulations. All right. So PPE hazard assessment. First, we follow the hierarchy of hazard control, right? Once we go through that, our last measure is our PPE. So what personal protective is required or needed for each task while performing the job. So don't forget, we got those other steps, take them into consideration. And then last, we take a look at the PPE. So be sure we cover all those steps, including the people performing the work. So part of the PPE hazard assessment, that's kind of your template. So breaking it down a bit further, we've got the project, what the project is, we got the job, we got the specific task required to be performed for that job, then those hazards associated with each task or each step, then the hazard control measures, right? That's what we want. That's what we're trying to get to. And then lastly, the personal protective equipment. So if you keep this in your mind, I think that's a good way to take a look at starting your PPE hazard assessment. Certainly for those folks that may have not done one of these yet. It's a good way to build a sound one. So before we jump into a couple of practice things, I'd like to, hopefully I can do this, share a little document with you that's a PPE hazard assessment. So everybody, can everybody see this document okay?
Yep, we can see it. If you want to
Okay.
make it a little bigger.
Let me see if I can make it a little bigger. How do I do that? It's in the document.
Down at the bottom, there's that little, yep, over a little bit more to the right.
Print
little bit bigger.
layout. Print layout a little bit, Amanda.
If you hit the little slider.
Oh, here we go. I got it. I can see it now. Okay. How's that? That better?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll just go down through a little bit with it. So heading really doesn't matter. So this happens to be chainsaw operation. So you can see a little bit. So those of you that have done a PPE hazard assessment before, you might develop an Excel spreadsheet. And for this job, you wear this PPE, right? And this PPE here. This here happens to be one of the styles that I like a little bit better than that. It spells some things out other than just the specific PPE. And it breaks the task down. So the chainsaw operation, right? The meat and potatoes, if you would, it's down here, right? It's operating the chainsaw, right? And it's easy just to say chainsaw and then put all this on here, right? You got all of this stuff. Hopefully you can see it okay. Leather gloves, safety glasses, hard helmet, full face screen, and all that sort of stuff. So operating the saw, everybody's going to agree that you need this sort of protection, right? Anytime that you're operating a chainsaw. And if you did just chainsaw and did this, what's going to happen is you come back up here to either sharpening the saw or fueling the saw, right? And I'm not saying that chaps isn't a good idea to have on while you're doing this, but more than likely when you're sharpening the saw or you're refueling or adding oil or whatever you're doing, if you're doing maintenance on the saw, right? Chances are, if that's all you're doing, you're probably not going to throw chaps on, right? Not saying that you wouldn't want to do that, but if you wrote it that way, then anytime somebody grab the saw, that's what you're looking for. From an accountability standpoint, the expectation is chaps, screen, helmet, all those sort of things. So this breaks it down a little bit into the task, and it talks about the hazards associated with the task. And then, okay, what PPE, what control measures, right? Largely PPE here because it's a PPE hazard assessment is required, right? Leather gloves, safety glasses, special precautions, secure the saw and chain against movement, right? So that would be in a vise or some sort of thing. And then fueling the saw and so forth. So giving you a little example, I'm just going to scroll down slowly so that you can start to think about, all right, how can I perform effective personal protective equipment hazard assessments, and gives a template for somebody, a system, if you would, for somebody to either learn from, to review, to go back to, or if something happened, an investigation type tool. So that's what we're looking at, is right there. And Amanda has a copy of that. So that's available to you as a possible format. What I wrap up with this is just use something in which is comfortable for your department, your organization, but just be sure you have something at the end, a tool, a system, a process that somebody can utilize. So we have a few minutes, I think, before we need to wrap up. And I want to try a task or two here from a PPE hazard assessment. So let's take a task, a project. We've got to cut a piece of concrete out of a sidewalk. And through, I think, Amanda, Q&A, if some people could throw up there, the project would be cutting concrete. So we'll just leave that fairly general. But if you could list the hazards and then the PPE, you don't have to go through the engineering controls and this and that, unless you want to. A bonus would be to throw out an engineering control that pops to my mind every time we have to cut concrete. That doesn't take the place of PPE, but would certainly be an effective control measure and lessen the hazard before you put the PPE on. So what are the hazards associated with cutting concrete? And then what are our specific PPE requirements if we are going to have somebody go out, or ourselves, we're going to go out and cut some concrete?
So we have dust, saw, silica exposure, water, dust mask, safety glasses.
Any goggles or face shields, Amanda?
Safety glasses at the moment.
Just okay. All right. Yep. And safety glasses might be enough here, depending if you got water. I like the water, right? Yeah. The engineering control first and foremost would be using a wet saw, right? And a good effective supply of water that cuts down on the dust and it cuts down on the flying debris, right? Silica
We have
exposure.
eyewear, mask, hearing protection, gloves. Hazards are flying debris, helmet, and face shield.
That's great. Yeah. So they put in the hazards and then they put in the effective control measures, the effective PPE control measures for that. Good. And that's, that's where you are. You're on the right page, is trying to, all right, what are the steps, right? And then what are the control measures? What's the PPE? What are the systems that we want to put in place? And then how we train people to do it. So let's take another one. So here's one here that probably all of us do at some sort of time. Is let's talk about the hazards encountered by flaggers. And so take it one step forward, that the task is to set up a work zone and put the flaggers in place. So set up a work zone, the task involved with that, to the point where we're putting our flaggers in place in the roadway to control the work zone. What are not so much the task, but what are the hazards associated with the task? Because you got to know them to know the hazards. So what are the hazards? And then what control measures?
We have flagger has an escape route.
Okay.
Closed lane next to lane for work, cone signs, helmet, flag, vest.
Okay.
Hazards are traffic, equipment, speeding cars, lack of awareness.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And that lack of awareness could be certainly the people driving right through your work zone. Hopefully it's not us.
Having them in high vis apparel.
Okay. Yep. Bare minimum class 2, right? Class 3 at night, lighted stations. Okay. Anything else, Amanda? Anything new? Whistles, horns?
Environmental, heat, and cold.
Okay, yep, weather conditions, right? Environmental conditions, certainly a factor, right? Would you not quite reaches the PP, but an example of the one we shared earlier is that, if it's, really cold outside, snow removal project in wintertime and it's 15 below or something, right? You might want to cycle out those flaggers, right?
We have one more. Flagger remains off the traffic lane.
Okay. Yep. A way out, right? Off the traffic lane, right? That's a whole different conversation with the flaggers and the positions, but that's true, right? Certainly a hazard would be the flagger in the improper or wrong position, right? Yep. And real quickly while we're on this, right? The biggest things here is come up with a plan, communicate that plan so that everybody understands it, and then go ahead and utilize the plan, right? Put the plan in place, right? So, all right, good. So that was designed to give you a little bit of an idea of, all right, what's the steps, what's the process? So a fairly simple one's concrete. a little bit more obscured, would be that flagger thing. And it works for anything you're doing, and it's a good template. And when you start looking at the PPE hazard assessment, if you've done good quality hazard assessments of what it is you do, that's your whole program. That really, it boils down from a safety program standpoint, is good, effective hazard assessments, and then developing or building systems to control those hazards that are identified, and then training the people. It's easier said, I know, than done, but if you can get yourself in that habit of following that format, you've got your entire program. You've got your entire program right there. So, all right, thanks for doing those couple of exercises, right? So a key fact in all the PPE is determining the inventory levels of what PPE you need, and then being sure you have them on hand when they need to be used, each type with each size required. So, really important. I find when you're working with PPE a little bit, that you get kind of what you paid for, right? And if you want your team to utilize the PPE, it needs to be good quality PPE that fits properly, that looks good, that fits well, things of that nature, and is got some things that withstand some of the environment conditions that it sees, right? Safety glasses and things like that, right? Make sure that you spend the time to take a look at the PPE and try to find some good quality PPE out there, because it's not all created equal. All right. So an overview, a little bit of shop safety. So we got the buildings, the grounds, and the shops themselves involved with the whole shop safety part of it. So clean, organized, and well planned out work areas, right? For just to review, that's really some of the most important things. Try to utilize that space so that you can be efficient as possible. So you can blend that, have that synergy of that safety, the quality and productivity involved in your work area. Try to get it clean, organized, well planned out, and keep it that way. If it's not as planned out as you'd like, at some point, take a little bit of time and plan it out. So you add in the PPE side of things and the safety, proper hazard assessment is really crucial in this. Understand what it is you're going to do, develop that system to do what it is you're going to do, communicate, train the people to follow that system, and then put good hazard control measures in with quality PPE usage. So remember that hierarchy of hazard control. Does anybody remember what the best way to control a hazard is? What's the best way to control a hazard? Separate the hazard from us, right? Separate the hazard, install that engineering control, right? That sort of thing. Remember, we went back and went through COVID a little bit there a few years ago, right? A little bit, I guess, a fair amount. But one of the control measures that started to happen was plexiglass, right? Separating out people from each other, that sort of thing. That's an example of an engineering control. So as opposed to just all wearing masks, or in addition to. So remember that hierarchy of hazard control, right? Eliminate substitute, engineering control, safe work practices, training, and then lastly, good quality control usage of PPE. So, okay, good. Overall, shop safety and PPE. Build great systems, develop good people, along with a foundation of solid trust, phenomenal leadership, and excellent communication. That really puts the culture to work for us. That's what you need. And when you start to look at it and break it down, it's a really good foundation to have. And you can do, along with some PPE hazard assessment, and understanding what hazards you're associating your people with. It's a really good program. It gives you everything you need to build your program and communicate your program to your people. Build great systems, develop good people with a foundation of solid trust, phenomenal leadership, in some excellent communication. That really develops the positive work culture. Get your people involved, right? When you're doing your hazard assessments, get the people involved doing the work so that you can really understand what the hazards are and understand, all right, let's get these people involved so that they're part of the solution. And summing it all up, our whole goal here, and this was a sticker from a hard helmet from a long time ago. One of the tough things about safety, and I've been doing it for a long time now, is you never know what you had an influence in preventing because it didn't happen. Unfortunately, you sure know what you couldn't influence, right? So that's one of the things that's difficult about safety. It's very hard to measure, and any measure is typically on the negative side of things. But do whatever you can to be sure that you don't overlook something and have, geez, you know, I wish I said something about that. I look back at it, right? So a little sticker here that makes a lot of sense, I think, is asking me to overlook a simple safety violation would be asking me to compromise my entire attitude toward the value of your life. And when it comes to, you know, the PPE, the shop safety, watching somebody maybe doing something that added a bit more risk than what was needed to an activity, think about this, because you might be apt to say a little something that might prevent something from happening if instead of just walking by and not dealing with something. So the goal, everyone goes home whole every day, and it's not one or two persons, you know, job or responsibility. It's everybody's responsibility. So if you build that culture, it gives you much more of an opportunity to prevent something from happening than not preventing something from happening. So thanks for your time. And I think it's about 10 or 10:01, 10:02, Amanda. So I think we did okay.
Yep. Thank you, Phil, for presenting, and thank you guys for hopping on and spending your morning with us. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, Amanda. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.
See ya. Bye. See you.